Hey YouTubers. Okay, I'm finally here with the 50mm / normal lens comparison video. I meant to do it last weekend, didn't get around to it. Then the Mac Pro came in, configured that, fooled around with it for a bit. Had some issues with screen flow when I tried to make this video a couple of nights ago, and it was not acting right. Today I fired it up to see if it was still busted, which it should be. It's software. It should always be busted if it's ever busted, but it works. So fine. I'm making the video now, so let's get going. I'm comparing 4 different lenses here. One is and you see it on your screen, one is the Sony FE55 f1.8, which is a Zeiss Sony lens native to the Sony A7 line of cameras. Next is the Minolta. This is an older lens, Minolta autofocus lens from the film days, and it's been adapted to the Sony A7 using the LA-EA4 adapter. And this is a lens it's a full frame lens. Being from the film days, that makes sense. And I was shooting it on my A900 before I got the A7. So again, I'm adapting it. This is the cheap choice that's out there, except that the adapter is not cheap. So it's kind of a trade-off there. If you already have the adapter, it's a really cheap lens, like anywhere from $50 to maybe $125. This is a 50mm f1.7. Next up is a Leica 50mm Summicron. This is an R mount lens. And I've done videos on this before. And next up, this is adapted as well. And next up is a 50mm Zeiss Sonnar M mount lens. So I've got 2 Zeiss sort of normal focal length Sonnar design lenses in this contest. One is the native, the other is the adapted M mount lens. So the order I'm showing you the lenses in here, the modern Sony FE Sonnar, the Minolta, the Leica, the Zeiss M mount Sonnar. That's the order the photos are in as well. So let's just dive in. The photos, I only took 2. The first one is more of a closer focus with the lenses wide open at their design maximum aperture. I didn't match apertures. I shot them at their own maximum aperture. I felt like that was probably the most fair comparison. And the second set of photos are at kind of a middle distance to distant at f8. So let's get into the first photo. Here it is. This is with the Zeiss 55, and you can see it's pretty darn sharp. It looks great. The bokeh looks great, and I would call this bokeh, and I've seen it in more than one shot that I've taken with this lens. I would call it painterly. It's just really beautiful, and it's almost like an oil painting back here in the background. So that's a big advantage of this lens. That combined with the sharpness is pretty impressive, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the Minolta 50mm f1.7. Again, shot wide open. You'll see a slight, I have the camera on a tripod, but you'll see a slight sort of a point of view change here because of the change in focal lengths. So here's the Minolta f1.7, wide open. Interestingly, the bokeh does not look as intense here, and this lens is ever so slightly faster than the 55, but of course the 55 is a little bit longer. In terms of comparison between the two, I don't think there's much of a comparison really. Just looking, at the full photo, the Zeiss is here, Minolta, Zeiss, Minolta. The Zeiss wins hands down and easily. The Minolta, it's the cheap choice if you have an adapter, and it's pretty good for being that cheap and being an older lens. This is it zoomed in, and you can see it's got a little spherical aberration, sort of that glow around things. So it just doesn't perform as well as the Zeiss. Let's get them side by side here. And again, on the left is the Zeiss, on the right is the Minolta. And I think there's really obviously no contest when you're pixel peeping between these two. So let's move on. Go back into single mode here. So come on now, work with me, Lightroom. I'm still becoming a Lightroom user. Next lens up is the Leica Summicron 50mm. That's an f2 lens. Again, wide open. And back to the Zeiss, Leica, Zeiss, Leica, Zeiss, Leica, Minolta, Leica, Minolta, Leica. Okay, so the Leica is an f2, 50mm. Between the Minolta and the Leica, I think the Leica wins, as it should. It's a pretty expensive lens. And it's funny, it's almost like the f2 lens has shallower depth of field than this f1.7 lens. Makes you wonder whether the design is actually, of the Minolta is actually an f1.7 or not. The Leica acquits itself really well, I think. Let me get them side by side again. Zoomed in, the Leica's, I think, clearly better than the Minolta. It's not as good as the Zeiss, in my opinion. I hope that comes across in the video. By the way, the photos, you can get them on Flickr. It's kind of silly to look at high-resolution photos in a video. So get onto Flickr. I've put the details in the description at the bottom. Anyway, the Leica holds up pretty well. It's an older lens, and it holds up pretty well to this modern lens, I would say. Let's move on to the Zeiss Sonnar. This is the M-mount lens. So having a similar design, it's going to have a similar look to the 55 FE f1.8. This lens, the one that we're looking at right now, this is the M-mount with an f1.5 maximum aperture. So let's kind of flip back and forth between those two. So we're on the 50mm Sonnar, 55 Sonnar, 50 Sonnar, 55 Sonnar. See that family resemblance? That bokeh is really nice between the two. Unless you look up here at these sort of point sources, which are really leaves. I think the modern Zeiss, the 55, does better. Again, this is the 50. That's the 55. I think the bokeh is nicer in the highlights. So let's get them side by side. So I'm talking about in this area, sort of upper left. The 55 just renders these highlights better, in my opinion. But overall, pretty amazing family resemblance, wouldn't you say? So let's zoom in on these guys. Again, this lens is not as sharp. The M mount lens, which is on the right, not as sharp as the modern 55mm, but it's pretty darn good. The 50 M mount is really a great portrait lens, in my opinion, because it's not overly sharp. It's sharp enough when it's wide open, but it has a beautiful dreamy background. So it's good for that kind of purpose, and it holds up pretty well in comparison to its modern autofocus brother here. So let's move on to the middle distance shot here. Again, we're starting with the Zeiss FE 55 1.8, and I'm going to. It looks great. Just it's obviously good. It's got good detail over in the corners. It is a very sharp lens. It's pretty obvious in every corner. It looks really good. Let's compare it to the Minolta. So Minolta, Zeiss, Minolta, Zeiss. Notice the color difference in the Minolta. It's a much warmer lens. Zeiss, Minolta, Zeiss, Minolta. And it's good in the center. Let's get them side by side. Let's get these guys like this. Okay, so again, Zeiss on the left, Minolta on the right. The Minolta is warmer, and if that appeals to you, it's a nice look. I think the Zeiss does a bit better in actual resolution in the center. If we go over to the side, I think it'll be pretty obvious that you look at this sign and the leaves that the Zeiss beats the pants off the Minolta. But again, the Minolta you can get for, I don't know, $75, between $75 and $125. So it's pretty cheap, and it's old. So they didn't need this kind of resolution in 35 millimeter film. This was probably a great lens in its time. All right, let's move on. We will go to now, so Zeiss, Minolta, to the Leica Summicron. Now this was really interesting to me. Zeiss, Leica, Zeiss, Leica, Zeiss, Leica. The Zeiss appears to have a little more pop. Let's get them side by side. I think it appears to have a little more pop. Now that I've got them side by side, I can't really say. But what I can say is the Leica actually has better rendering of the leaf detail. It's kind of in the contrast that we're seeing here. There's the tonal values are better in the Leica, in my opinion. I hope you can see what I'm talking about here. The way the leaves are modeled with the Leica is better than the way they're presented by the Zeiss, in my opinion. And then if we go over to the side, I think you can see that the Zeiss is a bit better. It's not phenomenally better, but it's a little better than the Leica. So this is why you pay the big bucks for Leica lenses. I mean, my 50 that we're looking at here, this is an old lens. It's, I don't know, I'm going to make a wild ass guess here and say it's from the very early 90s, late 80s. I should look it up. I'm not sure. But it's definitely holding up to this modern Zeiss lens. I mean, I just feel like there's no contest up here in the leaf detail. So I found that really interesting myself. Okay, now let's zoom back out. Okay, so again, this is the Leica, and I'm going to flip over to the Zeiss M-mount Sonnar, the 50 millimeter f1.5. All these are at f8, if I didn't mention that. One of the first things I notice here just is the sort of there's a distortion in one of these two lenses. This is the Zeiss 50 millimeter M-mount, and this is the Leica Summicron. Do you see the sort of perspective difference between the two? The Leica, I believe, has a little bit of barrel distortion. I think you can see that. There's the Leica, Zeiss, Leica, Zeiss. If you look at the telephone pole, the Leica's got a little bit of barrel distortion. Now, if you weren't flipping between photos, you'd never notice it. Anyway, let's compare the Zeiss to its brother like we did before. Get them up side by side. So we've got the 55 millimeter Zeiss, the FE on the left, and the 50 millimeter M-mount Zeiss on the right. Again, I think the M-mount Zeiss does a little bit better in the leaf area of the photo than the modern FE does. Now it could be, maybe, an exposure difference. Maybe there's a little more haze over when I took the shot with the Leica and the Zeiss 50 M-mount. Maybe the lighting was a little better, but I see a big difference here. It's not the kind of difference you notice if you're not pixel peeping, but you know, it's there. But the 55 millimeter FE lens blows the 50 millimeter M-mount Sonnar away in terms of corner sharpness. I mean, this is kind of ridiculous up here. I mean, the 50 millimeter M-mount just falls apart in the corners. This is at f8, so pretty surprisingly poor showing from that lens in the corners. But that lens, honestly, as I've mentioned before during this demo, I think of it more as a portrait and art lens. It's not like a landscape lens. It's not a perfection lens. It's it's a lens that says something more than just resolution. It has a particular rendering that's really nice on the right subject, and it's really one of my favorite lenses. So that's it for the comparison. I know I kind of just flipped around between stuff, but if you're comparing 4 different lenses, what are you going to do? Hopefully it helped you kind of see what the differences between different models of lenses are, what kind of qualities you might look for when you're comparing lenses. And if you have any questions or comments, as usual, feel free to make them, and I'll respond. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.